Hello everyone, this is Ray Mao, a research scientist from Nanyang Technological University. Today, I'm going to share our latest findings regarding the brain signal responses induced by metaphors. This work provides empirical evidence from the perspective of neuroscience for justifying the rationale of using metaphors to analyze cognition. This paper is entitled Decoding Metaphors and Brain Signals in Naturalistic Contexts, empirical study based on EEG and MetaPro. George Lakoff and Mark Johnson came up with conceptual metaphor theory in their book, Metaphor We Live By. This book suggests a novel argument that metaphors are not just linguistic devices, but also cognitive tools that shape our thought and reasoning. They believe that our entire conceptual system is metaphorically structured. We learn abstract concepts from the concrete ones by using metaphors. For example, in order to understand the attribute of the concept argument, we may use the concept of war in our metaphorical expressions and say, she attacked my argument. Metaphors frames our cognitive system because when we project the concept of argument to war, we will naturally think in terms of strategies, defenses, and victories. This framing influences not only how we talk about arguments, but also how we mentally approach them, seeing discussions as battles to win rather than dialogues to understand. So when we say she attacked my argument, we mentally build up a concept mapping. Argument is war. Using concept mappings to analyze cognition is commonly found in psychological tests. For example, the video shows a scene of word association tests from 007 Skyfall. The psychologist says a word and James Bond says the first word comes into his mind. There is an interesting concept mapping. The psychologist says heart, James says target. This is unusual for normal people but understandable for him because he was trained for aiming at heart and then shooting. So to him, heart is target. But obtaining concept mappings in this way is time consuming, costly, and difficult to analyze a big population. In contrast, with computational tools, obtaining concept mappings from everyday language and from metaphors is cheap and non-invasive. Thus, metaphors enable us to study cognition with a bottom-up approach and discover patterns from a big population without running interviews like in the movie. Even though conceptual metaphor theory argues that metaphors frame our cognition, it's mainly based on linguistic and philosophical analysis. It would be important to zoom in brain signals so that we can better justify whether and how metaphorical concept mappings are reflected in neural activity. By analyzing EEG responses to metaphorical versus literal expressions, our study offers direct neural evidence that supports the idea that different concept mappings are processed differently in the brain, providing a firmer scientific foundation for metaphor-based cognitive analysis. There have been a few studies exploring the relationship between metaphors and brain signals, but most of these experiments were conducted in tightly controlled lab settings using carefully designed stimuli. While that approach is useful, it doesn't really reflect how we encounter metaphors in everyday language. For example, participants in early studies were often asked to identify metaphors from short, isolated phrases, something we don't really do in real life. In our study, we took a more realistic approach. Instead of asking participants to detect or interpret metaphors explicitly, they simply read regular Wikipedia articles just like they would in their daily routine. While they were reading, their brain signals were recorded. This setup allows us to see how metaphorical expressions influence neural activity in a more naturalistic setting. Our work helps demonstrate that metaphors do shape brain responses even in everyday contexts, and it provides neuroscience-based evidence supporting the use of metaphors as a powerful tool for analyzing cognition. This study follows four main steps: EEG signal collection, metaphor identification and concept mapping generation, alignment and feature extraction, and finally statistical analysis. To begin with, we use a public EEG dataset that includes recordings from 18 participants. Each participant completed two types of rating tasks. The first was normal rating, where they simply read Wikipedia articles without any specific goals, just like casual browsing. The second was task-specific rating, where they rate similar Wikipedia scripts but with a clear objective, answering simple questions like what year was this person born? What's the relationship between these two people? This task mimics real-world goal-driven rating behavior. In total, they rate 739 scripts, where 349 for normal rating and 390 for task-specific rating. During the rating process, EEG signals were recorded along with eye tracking data. This allows us to align the brain signals with the exact words participants were looking at. Next, we move on to metaphor detection and concept mapping. We use MetaPro, our end-to-end metaphor processing system, which includes modules for metaphor identification, interpretation, and concept mapping generation. It's a high-performance system as shown in several recent publications. But to ensure accuracy for our study, we manually reviewed and corrected all metaphors and concept mappings predictions made by MetaPro. Because we have known which words are metaphorical and we have synchronized the EEG and eye tracking data, we can isolate the brain responses for metaphorical words and compare them to literal words of the same part of speech. We also matched the number of metaphors and literals to control for imbalance. For the neural analysis, we extracted three types of features: time domain features, which capture the overall trend in brain activity; frequency domain features, which help us understand brain activation properties during metaphor processing; and brain network features, which reveal how different brain regions interact while processing metaphorical language. In total, we identified 234 metaphors and their corresponding EEG signals. These covered 179 unique concept mappings, showing the rich variety of metaphor types in our analysis and highlighting the complexity of metaphorical cognition that we aim to decode. We will conduct a statistical analysis based on EEG signals from metaphorical and literal expressions. First, we found that all significant differences between metaphorical and literal expressions show up in the higher frequency bands. Specifically, metaphorical expressions triggered stronger time domain signals than literal ones. These increases were most noticeable in the left frontal lobe and the right parietal occipital lobe. This suggests that processing metaphors involves more intense high-frequency brain activity, especially in areas related to contextual integration and deep semantic understanding like the left frontal lobe. Next, in brain network analysis, cognitive differences between metaphorical and literal expressions are observed mainly in the beta and gamma bands. Compared to literal expressions, metaphors led to stronger connectivity in the frontal, central, and temporal lobes. These effects were mainly in the left hemisphere, indicating a clear hemispheric asymmetry. What this tells us is that understanding metaphors requires richer semantic processing and involves more cross-regional communication in the brain, especially in the left hemisphere. Things get even more interesting when we look at the differences across reading conditions. Under normal reading, metaphor processing activated strong high-frequency oscillations in the left frontal lobe, but at the same time, we saw reduced activity in the right frontal and right parietal occipital lobes. Under task-specific reading, the metaphor effects became even more pronounced. We observed the stronger left hemisphere oscillations, particularly in the high-frequency range, and the suppressed activity on the right. The brain network analysis also showed enhanced connectivity in the left frontal, central, and temporal regions for metaphors, and the hemispheric asymmetry became even clearer in the goal-directed reading scenario. Finally, we also zoom in to examine the EEG responses for individual concept mappings. We randomly selected 3 different mappings and compared them in pairs. What we found was that each concept mapping presented distinct patterns across time, frequency, and network level features. In other words, metaphors are not processed through one single neural route. Each concept mapping taps into unique neural circuits. This supports the idea that metaphorical cognition is multifactored, involving both local brain regions and large-scale network transformation. To wrap up, here's what we learned. Metaphors and literal expressions trigger different brain responses during naturalistic reading. These differences are amplified under task-specific reading, suggesting that cognitive load and reading goals matter. Different metaphorical concept mappings engage distinct neural mechanisms. All of this points to one conclusion. Metaphorical cognition isn't just a linguistic phenomenon. It's deeply embedded in the brain's neural architecture that makes metaphors a powerful lens for studying how the brain processes complex concepts. In our previous work, we have shown that metaphors can be powerful tools for understanding cognition across a wide range of domains like technology, finance, marketing, mental health, social bias, weather disasters, and even political figures. What's new in this study is that we now have neural evidence to support the idea that metaphors are not just useful analytically, but also grounded in how the brain actually processes information. We have also done related research in behaviors, which shows a moderate correlation between metaphorical cognition and decision-making at the United Nations. Taken together, these findings suggest that metaphors are much more than the way we speak or write. They reflect how we think, feel, and make decisions. They give us a unique medium to study cognition. You are very welcome to read the papers on the right to see how we developed the metaphor processing system, MetaPro, and how we gained cognitive insights from metaphors. Thank you for listening.